man, I can't wait to play my first legendary in this brand new game, Brawl Stars. Look at Leon go. He's just the coolest, most powerful brawler in the game. Look, he can even go invisible. Watch him go. Oh my gosh, he's just the most overpowered and unique brawler ever. There's no way he could fall off. Huh. We can make a 30-minute long video out of this. Leon is one of the most interesting brawlers in Brawl Stars. Just a few years ago, it felt like he was one of the faces of the game, but lately he's lost a lot of his spotlight. Why is that the case? You probably already know about his fall in the meta and how his abilities became less unique, but was this really necessary? Was Leon unfairly nerfed and robbed of the abilities that made him so special, or was his decline an inevitable result of the game developing? It's a little bit of both, but to answer those questions, we first gotta go all the way back to 2018, marking the start of one of the craziest downfalls in all Brawl Stars history: Leon's broken release. Our first ever look at Leon came on November 30th, 2018. A truly special Brawl Talk, considering it was literally the first one ever and probably came out before half my Mythic randoms were born. This update marked Brawl Stars' global release, a special moment in the game's history that brought way more players and quite a few changes. The game got a much needed graphics buff with a new 3D environment and a lot of new brawler models, but one of the most exciting parts of the update was that sweet new legendary brawler. Leon was introduced as not only the third ever legendary, but also the third ever assassin in the entire game. His main attack was shown to deal extra damage the closer he was to an enemy, but more importantly, his super let him go invisible. At this point, the assassin playstyle in Brawl Stars was something strongly desired in the community, a type of gameplay players wished they saw more of in the game. Imagine that. So naturally, a lot of the player base loved this concept. The small yet dedicated beta community were looking forward to finally having a stealth type brawler who finally scratched that assassin itch players couldn't get with just Mortis and Crow alone. Just 5 days later, Leon made his debut into beta Brawl Stars before the game would finally launch globally 1 week later. And as the community celebrated over this momentous occasion, a slight problem with the game's balance brewed in the distance: the most broken assassin of all time. Brawl Stars at this point was still a very new game. The balancing process wasn't as intricate, and the dev team didn't have as much experience balancing wacky new abilities. Consider at the time that things like Crow Poison and Spike's attack pattern were considered legendary worthy mechanics. So when Leon was crafted for global launch, they had to decide how his invisibility worked. And I don't know if they just eyeballed a number, but they made it last 10 seconds long. 10 seconds. If it doesn't register just how long that is, Sandy Super nowadays lasts 9 seconds, Kit's Gadget lasts 3, and Kaze's lasts 1.5. We're getting a bit ahead of ourselves, but 10 seconds was absurd for invisibility. But that wasn't even the end of it when Leon was first released. His invisibility would also linger, no matter how close he was to an enemy. Leon could literally stand right on top of you or run straight past you without you ever knowing. You had no heads up to run away, no option to corner him if you were a melee brawler, no way to prevent him from getting maximum damage. You literally just had to shoot blindly to find him, but Leon could be anywhere since 10 seconds gave him a lot of time to take a road trip across the entire map. This forced Brawl Stars to perform, as far as I know, the first emergency nerf on any brawler ever, now making it so Leon became visible to any brawlers that came close to him just 2 days after his release. Still, while this ability was entirely too broken, it might have been manageable if Leon's stats were underwhelming. But no, Leon had insane burst damage, could literally 2-tap most brawlers, and yeah, even had crazy good range DPS for a so-called assassin. There was nothing Leon couldn't do. He could fight you from afar, he could burst you up close, he had crazy utility with his super, and given his very fast movement speed and smoke trail star power that boosted his speed while he was invisible, he was probably faster than you too. The reason why Leon was so overpowered was that he had no reliable counters. So from the sounds of how busted Leon was, it seems that he would be found everywhere. After all, why wouldn't every player just spam the new broken brawler in every map and mode? Until you realize this was like early 2019. This was the era of brawl boxes and when the vast majority of players had less than 2 months worth of progression on their accounts. The odds that any given player even had Leon or even one legendary was really low. A lot of players who started playing at this time wouldn't get a legendary for months, maybe over a year later, since that side of progression was all RNG. And even when they did, they only had a 33% chance that legendary would be Leon. a unique situation formed. There was a brawler let loose that was extremely overpowered and dominated every mode, but was uncommon enough that the average casual player didn't have to face him very often. Leon was an emergency nerf to the ground, as while he did break the game in theory, he didn't really break the game in practice. We can recall periods of overpowered, overused brawlers like Rosa and Edgar, but Leon never had that experience since he was so exclusive. This immediately gave Leon this elite reputation. He was the legendary everyone wanted to get, but was so mystical and unobtainable that he only appeared to dominate a match every so often. In my opinion, this was the peak of Leon's aura. A one-of-a-kind legendary assassin who was at their prime in the meta, but so elusive that he wasn't annoyingly oppressive. However, Brawl Stars couldn't let this slide forever. Sure, Leon was hard to get, but he was still a broken menace almost anyone could tell was overpowered. Supercell wanted Leon to be strong, but we were reaching the point of cruel and unusual balancing. Imagine the frustration of being a new player and getting wiped by a brawler you had close to zero chance of unlocking yourself. So in the next few months, Leon would be dealt heavy blows that resulted in his greatest decline ever. Just 4 months following Global Brawl Stars, Leon received his first wave of nerfs. By the end of it, tanking a harsh 12% damage nerf, a 3-second shorter super duration, and an 11% nerf to his supercharge rate. This combination of nerfs would cripple any mortal being into bottom tier, but this was prime Leon we're talking about. He still remained an S tier brawler following these changes, albeit just not a top 1 brawler in the game anymore. And even though Leon stayed a really strong brawler for quite a while, the community wasn't as burnt out on this type of pattern. If this happened nowadays, the player base would already be crying about how much of a cash grab Leon was and how Greedy Cell was poisoning the meta by pushing for a broken assassin for the 7 billionth time. But by this point in the game, Leon was one of the first overpowered releases ever. This was before many of the later monetization methods Brawl Stars would eventually try, and the pressure of an established competitive scene relying on game balance to function properly. Instead of being majorly disappointing, Leon's overpowered era was almost kinda hype and gave him this special kind of energy. In the summer, Leon's Invisiheel star power was released, offering a less aggressive star power option that improved Leon's survivability. Invisiheel started off as the less preferred star power by far, but quickly gained more relevance after 2 consecutive buffs brought it from 600 healing per second to 1000 by the end of October. Though in that same October update, Leon's super duration was lowered even further, bringing it to its current 6 seconds that's still around today. This is a 40% decrease from its original launch, just to show how nuts it was on release. And once this happened, all the nerfs that had been piling on Leon for nearly a year finally caught up to him, making him a low mid-tier brawler for the very first time. While we're there, this is also the update Leon received his voice lines, and honestly, at the time, I thought it was pretty lame. Story time. Okay, so I don't know if you've shared this experience with me, but before I heard his voice lines 6 years ago, I thought Leon was so tough, like his aura and mysteriousness was unmatched. Dude was like a silent ninja, a stoic rebel who took orders from nobody, and then you listen to his voice lines and it's like, woohoo!
Sneaky time!
Obviously, I've come around to it because it is more fitting for Leon's design. Yes, he sounds like a normal kid because that's kind of what he is canonically, but Little Saver was just disappointed that Leon's mysterious aura disappeared the moment that kid opened his mouth. And what makes it even worse is that this was right on the heels of a new brawler release that marked the start of a terrible trend. In just a month previous came the release of the 4th legendary brawler, Sandy. Now, being of the most exclusive special rarity of all of them at the time meant that Sandy had to introduce one of the most jaw-dropping, unique abilities in the game. Why is it just invisibility again? Okay, Sandy didn't take all of Leon's thunder, just a lot of it. Now, you might say Sandy's invisibility is completely distinct from what Leon does. It's invisibility within a large radius, a completely different vibe from the free roaming kind that Leon has. It's also a team invisibility, giving it a support role that feels way different than Leon's assassinating kind. So there it is. Sandy's a totally unique brawler, no harm done. Kind of. Because you gotta admit, for being only the 4th legendary in the game, released not even a year after Leon, it kinda sucks that invisibility was reused so soon. I mean, just think about how many abilities were released after this point that were way more unique than what Sandy does and also didn't dilute Leon's mechanics so quickly. But it's fine, whatever. As long as this doesn't happen too often in the future, Leon will always feel really unique. Though his fall from grace would only reach lower depths the more time that passed. By the start of 2020, Leon had lost most of his viability in 3v3 game modes since his super and base stats had been so crippled. His best use case was solo showdown, becoming the best way to push trophies with him by a long shot. Because by this point, Leon's kit was so selfish, it was pretty much made to just win 1v1s. Leon's main attack nerfs made him pretty unviable as a ranged option, offering little pressure to the enemies before he charged his super. Then, once he did charge it, he could use it to assassinate one brawler, but his lack of mobility out of those situations made him really vulnerable to kill traits, especially with his slow reload speed. He just did much better playing for himself than contributing to a team. That's why in February of 2020, over a year since his release, Leon got his first buffs to his base kit ever, gaining a damage buff at max range intended to help with his long-range weaknesses. But as the months passed, Leon got power crept bit by bit until he was left unrecognizable by the end of the year. Leon's pool of counters grew larger. Back in early 2019, Leon felt like he could wipe any team comp since assassin counter options were so limited. But by 2020, players had access to far more abilities to deal with aggressive brawlers, especially with the release of gadgets. With the release of gadgets in March, Leon mains held out hope that their favorite legendary could gain another ability that could return him to his former self. Well, look no further than Clone Projector, another thrilling addition to Leon's kit and one of the coolest first gadgets released with the new update. This ability was so unique, creating an illusionary clone of Leon that chased down enemies, adding to Leon's sneaky and mischievous character so well. Being able to trick enemies with this gadget was so fun. You could use it as you went invisible, run alongside it to confuse enemies, and oh, I forgot to mention this gadget was completely useless. This clone did not move convincingly at all. Any decent player could notice it right away, and it didn't help that this thing died instantly. Like, that's not a figure of speech. This clone evaporated at the touch of a single projectile. Even if the enemies were fooled by it, this illusion lasted all of 2 seconds and only spent one of the enemy's ammo. Genuinely one of the most useless gadgets of all time. Leon's trajectory kept moving downwards with no signs of letting up. Supercell threw Leon another small damage buff his way and made his gadget at least somewhat usable, changing it so it took double damage instead of just vanishing instantly, but it seems the meta was fully set on adapting to Leon's once broken role. Because another aspect of Leon's downfall is that his element of surprise, his wacky ability no one knew how to answer, became old news. Basic positioning knowledge became more commonplace. If a Leon dives into a bush with a fully charged super, it's probably a good idea to stick with a teammate and not overextend. Little things like that gave Leon much less influence over competitive and casual matches, especially as more players started unlocking Leon, giving players more experience facing him. Leon's last buffs for a while came at the end of 2020 and the start of 2021, where Leon received a speed buff to smoke trails, another small damage buff, and a faster supercharge rate. But when these changes had no effect at reviving Leon's viability at all, Supercell seemingly gave up. For the next 6 months, Leon received no balance changes, coasting at low tier for the entire duration. Since Leon's decline towards the end of 2019, Supercell made pretty consistent efforts to buff Leon in response to power creep. But the issue is that Leon still terrorized solo showdown and low ladder. The casual side of the game couldn't deal with Leon so easily. So for this half-year period, Leon was left as a bottom-tier brawler, what I consider to be his darkest hour. But with every down comes an up, and with Leon's terrible gadget being one of the largest blemishes of his kit, an absolutely overpowered one would arrive to fill its spot. Lollipop Drop arrived in July of 2021, an absolute game changer for Leon's viability, becoming arguably the most broken ability out of all the new second gadgets. It single-handedly revived him back to high tier, basically turning Leon into a new brawler overnight. This gadget placed a Lollipop turret that granted Leon and his teammates invisibility within its radius. And while the Lollipop had a health bar, it didn't decay, meaning without a wall break or thrower, the enemy team was pretty much out of luck getting rid of this thing if you placed it right. This allowed Leon's team to control that much more of the map with a constant budget Sandy Super, making it easily one of the best gadgets in all Brawl Stars history. In October, Lollipop Drop was rightfully nerfed, adding a decay effect that completely killed the Lollipop in 20 seconds if left untouched. Which is, by the way, still way too long. 1 minute total across all 3 uses gave Leon's team such a strong positioning advantage throughout the entire match. It basically necessitates the enemies to go out of their way to take it out unless they want to deal with Leon's team getting a mini Sandy Super. So Leon officially reached his most healthy state yet, at least from the perspective of a Leon main who wanted him to do well. Bouncing between high A and low S tier meant Leon wasn't necessarily in the hot seat for immediate nerfs, but was also super viable because of his gadget. On the other hand, you can argue this was one of Leon's least healthy states yet, since he was such a gadget merchant, literally relying on this one mechanic to be competitively viable. Let's not forget that Leon was locked down at bottom tier until his second gadget brought him back to life. At this point, Leon wasn't technically an unbalanced brawler, but you couldn't help but feel he was a little too much of a one-trick. Situations like these aren't major red flags that warrant emergency reworks, but are small flaws in a brawler's game design which can be put off for a while. Obviously, it's not preferred for a brawler to have one extremely powerful gadget and one that never gets used. But Supercell has a lot of fish to fry, and a lot of these little design issues with certain brawlers can go untreated for months, maybe even years. And untreated it was, because Leon was ignored for 20 straight months. From late 2021 to late 2023, Leon receives no balance changes, making it his longest period without balance changes ever. In the grand scheme of Brawl Stars, this is a super long time to let power creep bite at your ankles. A bunch of new assassin counters were added to the game, and Leon's range damage output that was already underwhelming became more obsolete. He never reached bottom tier because his gadget always provided value, but Leon truly got choke held into this one trick role. He pulled up to plop his sucker onto the floor and then just tried to hold his own as a regular assassin because that dumb piece of candy was basically half his worth. At first glance, this period may have appeared to be Leon's most balanced state, but the word balanced had a fat asterisk next to it. He was basically just a low tier brawler with a top tier gadget. Force Leon at this time to use Clone Projector, and he was pretty useless in 3v3. Slowly but steadily though, Leon declined, going from high A tier to low B tier for the 20 months he was unaccounted for. As a legendary brawler, he also became less special the moment the credit update dropped in late 2022. I explain it more in my video about new brawlers, but this is basically because unlocking these legendaries and higher rarity brawlers became guaranteed. Leon went from being an elusive myth you were praying to bless your boxes to probably being the first legendary you unlocked maybe only 2 or so months into playing the game. He just didn't feel special to unlock anymore. During this time period, the only change for Leon was gaining his mythic gear, Lingering Smoke. An underwhelming addition to his kit. It only increased his super duration 1 measly second, something you would hardly ever get value out of, especially since you were likely to attack before your invisibility ended anyway. However, the end of 2023 brought buffs to Leon's base health, Invisi-Heal star power, and added an extra second to his mythic gear. That extra second actually gave it more purpose, as it allowed Leon to get 2 extra ticks of star power healing instead of just 1. So you could actually argue it was worth using by this point. Still though, these changes were not enough to bring Leon viability again. The way the meta was shifting was not giving Leon any favors, and it seemed that his time in the spotlight was truly over. But looking at Leon's full kit at the time, there's one button you'll notice missing, one whose appearance will turn Leon's trajectory completely on its head. Leon's Hypercharge, Limbo, was released in December of 2023, allowing him to stay invisible when he attacked enemies. This ability is deceptively useful, even if the effects aren't mind-blowing at face value. For one, this Hypercharge allows for some crazy outplay potential. A limitation of Leon's normal super is that it struggles to team wipe on its own. With this Hypercharge, however, Leon can link between multiple kills since he could assassinate one target with his super, and then actually assassinate 1 or 2 others since he kept his invisibility. This ability also synergizes insanely well with his 2 star powers since they both get to last the full 6-second duration his super is active. Or should I say 8 seconds? Remember his mythic gear that just got buffed? Well, now this mythic gear always got full value when used with his Hypercharge. But let's be honest, the main benefit of this Hypercharge were the sweet stat buffs. A 25% damage buff, 25% shield, and 20% speed were all Leon needed to completely wipe an enemy team and make crazy late game plays. Since Leon was early to the Hypercharge hype train, he got to be among the first brawlers to get this broken mechanic that allowed players to turn games completely around. How often nowadays will you see gem grab, bounty, or really any 3v3 match completely change its outcome based on a timely purple button press in the last 10 seconds? Leon got to be among the first to do this, not just because of the Hypercharge effect itself, but also because he had access to these late game stat boosts that most brawlers didn't have an answer to. Limbo wasn't immediately seen as this broken Hypercharge release on day one. More so, competitive players slowly realized over the next month or two that Leon stealthily became a top 3 brawler because of this Hypercharge. And with the way his Hypercharge tied all the other parts of his kit together, from his star powers to even his mythic gear, Leon finally reached the top of the meta again without being a complete one-trick pony. Limbo enjoyed 4 months in the spotlight before quickly being nerfed, which we all could have seen coming. But the nerfs that weren't as expected were the nerfs to Leon's base kit. In addition to his Hypercharge stat nerfs, Leon received nerfs to his range damage and supercharge rate, changes completely unexpected since his base kit hasn't even been a problem since 2019. The only reason these stats looked so problematic were because of the stupid crazy plays Leon could make with his Hypercharge. Leon fell victim to this Hypercharge syndrome, so to speak, turning reliant on a mechanic that would only become less and less unique to him as other brawlers got their Hypercharges as well. Leon was ignored for another year, collapsing to mid-tier following his nerfs in March and remaining there for the rest of 2024. However, early in 2025, a massive balancing decision took the Brawl Stars meta by storm: the gadget rework. This honestly had a minimal impact on Leon's performance. While the rework initially helped Leon, allowing the long-known gadget merchant to spawn even more lollipops, this gadget would finally be humbled the very next month, increasing the lollipop's rate of decay, bringing its natural duration down to 10 seconds from 20. Funnily enough, the gadget rework actually tightened the gap between lollipop drop and clone projector, since Leon can now spawn clones really often after this rework, meaning in showdown or super open maps, clone projector is arguably better. I mean, I don't know why you would use Leon in a super open map anyway, but hey, a win is a win. This brings us to Leon's most recent balance changes: buffs to his max range damage and supercharge rate in September, reverting some of the base kit nerfs he received when his Hypercharge was still peaking. A fair balance change considering those nerfs to Leon's stats only really resulted from his insane Hypercharge era. This was especially needed given the Hypercharge rework dealt in October, which crippled the Hypercharge stat buffs Leon was so reliant on to make plays. In case you didn't know, this rework brought all the varying Hypercharge stat boosts down to a single universal buff: 5% shield and damage and a 20% speed. Before the rework, there was this sort of Hypercharge spectrum brawlers fell under. On one end were the brawlers who relied more on the effects of their Hypercharge, and on the other were brawlers who relied on the stat boosts. Most of the effect-based Hypercharges were fine after the rework, but the ones who depended on the stat boosts got killed since the Hypercharge boost was basically watered down to just a speed buff. Since Leon's an assassin who depended on his 25% damage boost from his Hypercharge to make late game team wipes, this rework killed Leon's relevancy and makes his Hypercharge way more underwhelming, leaving him in low tier in present day, a crazy fall from grace from his 3 eras of dominance: his initial release, the rise of lollipop drop, and the era of Limbo. But the thing about these 3 eras is that they weren't equal, not just in a game balance sense, but in the ways they felt. When Leon first released, his dominance felt special. There was a unique aura to his presence, an element of novelty he had as a brawler and an overpowered character. Yet when Leon's Hypercharge made him top tier, he didn't hold the same it factor he once did. So why does Leon's downfall feel so significant even if his fall in the meta wasn't that drastic? He's just a mid tier, nowhere near the worst brawler in the game or anything. Nostalgia is a strong factor, but that's not the only reason Leon as a brawler doesn't hold up the way he used to. For a live service game like Brawl Stars, it's inevitable it'll fall into some of the traps these games tend to do, like power creep. This is a really popular term to describe when new content in a game starts to surpass old content in power and viability. We'll be talking about a different common pitfall Brawl Stars also experiences that I think is usually less acknowledged by the community since it has less of an immediate effect on the game. But I'd argue it has an even bigger long-term effect on how Brawl Stars will feel moving forward. We'll call it complexity creep, a less popular term meant to describe the trend of a game to get more complex over time. Leon back then was the cream of the crop in terms of uniqueness and complexity, and now we got brawlers who take Leon's main selling point as a gadget and build on top of that with their own base kits. The same applies for the other original legendaries, Spike and Crow. They were once the most special brawlers in the game, but now Mo is more unique than Spike in pretty much every way, and you can make the argument that Crow was complexity crept as early as the Edgar and Byron update, as poisoning enemies and being a jumping assassin became less unique. So to keep the fresh feeling and original integrity of Brawl Stars, would it be better to solve this complexity creep problem by never spreading out these special abilities? No. You can't do that. Okay, with this many brawlers in the game, some of these mechanics literally have to be spread out somehow. For one, imagine there being 100 brawlers in the game and having to keep track of one unique mechanic for almost every single one of them. By this point, if we completely avoided mechanic recycling at all costs with every new brawler, these new abilities would probably start getting so convoluted and needlessly complicated, just so every brawler could have their own special thing. You can only add unique mechanics that are also intuitive, like invisibility and poison, so many times before eventually you start running out. So a sacrifice has to be made. Do you bite the bullet on diluting the specialty of old mechanics by giving them to new brawlers, or complicate the game with increasingly complex new mechanics? Now, for some of you, that second option might actually sound really attractive. But you're also the one knee-deep into a 30-minute yap session about a single character in the game, so maybe you're just a little more dedicated than the average player. Learning a new brawler with Kaze-like complexity or more, repeated until the end of time for each new brawler release, is not something most players care about. They just want to play a brawler with a kit that feels intuitive and fun that they can start winning with right away. And what better way to do that than to implement mechanics players already know and love? It kinda sucks for competitive players who wouldn't mind every new brawler to have a level of depth similar to Kaze or even deeper, but at the end of the day, Brawl Stars should try to keep its mobile game charm just a little bit. That's how the game will keep expanding rather than appeal to a small cult following of 50,000 weirdos who like when character attack descriptions start to become short comprehensive essays. However, my lenient perspective on mechanic recycling starts to wear off when we get to the gadgets of the game. Things like Meeple's walls, Cordelius' silencing, you guessed it, all the invisibility gadgets. Now, some of these gadgets, like Meeple's walls, feel a little derivative but also have a fun element of synergy with the brawler's base kit. Since Meeple's gimmick is hitting through walls, being able to create them makes some sense for his game design, even if this gadget is stupid. Other gadgets, however, are like, why do we do this? I mean, I get why, it's fun. Kit feels way more fun with this gadget because invisibility is a fun mechanic. But now we run into the problem of, Leon's okay I guess, I mean, I already play Kit all the time. There's less urge or excitement to play Leon because his entire gimmick and fun element is replicated to some extent by another brawler on top of whatever extra mechanics that brawler has. Sure, Leon still has his own feel, but I don't exactly need to go to him to get my stealthy invisibility fix anymore because I frequently play Kit, Juju, Kaze. They don't do it as well as Leon, but it doesn't prevent him from feeling less and less special every day. The Sprout and Meeple example is fine for me because if I want to have fun building walls and making those types of plays, I'll still go to Sprout for that because Meeple's the only one who can kinda do it too, and the way he does it is completely different. The wall mechanic hasn't been diluted to me, so Sprout still monopolizes that fun mechanic in the game. But for Leon, his copies aren't restricted to just one brawler. It's a small handful who also replicate the exact same feeling with only a few seconds shaved off. For example, if Sandy and let's say Ali were the only other brawlers to have some form of invisibility, Leon would still feel truly special because all these abilities are used for different purposes and no one can go invisible exactly the same way. And guess what? Those two brawlers happen to be exactly the only other brawlers to have invisibility in their base kits rather than some gadget. These green buttons are almost always the biggest culprit for this lazy kind of mechanic recycling. Gadgets aren't the end of the world, okay? Because even after all this yap, Leon is still one of my favorite brawlers to play, and invisibility is so fun of a mechanic that Leon's enjoyable just because he's the best at it, even if it's less of a novelty now. But Leon still stands as a prime case study of a dangerous trap Brawl Stars should try to avoid: devaluing the specialty of each brawler. The uniqueness of each character shouldn't be taken for granted. It shouldn't be shrugged off as, oh, we need a cool unique gadget, and copy and paste something we've done before. Or even new main attacks and supers, just copy and paste from an old brawler and add some extra spice. It'll be fine, the original brawler's kit is still unique to them and has their own feel. This won't change anything. But it does, bit by bit, until you realize, dang, I cannot enjoy Jackie anymore because I already play Doug and Trunk and RT. Leon does feel a lot lamer nowadays since a handful of brawlers can go invisible too. This may feel like a nothing burger problem, but what'll happen to the feel of Brawl Stars when this complexity creep goes too far? Brawlers like Stu in this meta just feel super underwhelming because it feels like Nina does exactly what he does but better. But imagine if it wasn't just Stu. What if that became just about every brawler released pre-2022, leaving 50 brawlers in the roster super uninspiring to play because the latest brawlers do exactly what they do but better with a little extra flair. As I said, it's a tough ask to invent completely new abilities and mechanics for each brawler, and that kind of approach can lead to a lot of different problems. There should be some element of mechanic recycling, but done in a way that doesn't detract from the original brawler completely. Things like Sandy Super. Sure, I dogged on it for coming too soon after Leon, but he stands as a perfect example of taking a unique mechanic and putting a new spin on it that makes the ability feel completely new. We can reuse these old mechanics out of necessity, but we also need to make sure these abilities are used in unique ways and have different applications from the original brawler. Gadgets that reuse abilities often don't do it out of necessity and also don't have unique applications. And all the invisibility gadgets are some of the worst culprits. The fall of Leon does not just have to do with his stay in the meta, but also his reputation in the game. One day, it's likely he'll rise again with a few buffs and be back in flavor, but he'll never feel the same or even as worthy of the legendary rarity as he once was. Leon's story isn't the greatest downfall because he became the worst brawler or even anything close to it, but because he went from being the most powerful, rare, unique brawler in the game to being mediocre, common, and frankly unspecial in Brawl Stars today. Is that just nostalgia? Maybe, but you can't deny that Leon's journey truly does feel like the fall of a king. Or maybe it's not that deep. You tell me, but this brawler also had a pretty crazy downfall. You can learn about it right here. I'm trying to hit 10,000 subscribers, so I'm truly grateful for any of your help.